I don't recall if I shared it in the last hour or if I did it during my preview on Facebook this morning, but I was talking about the embarrassment for a lot of the liberals and the fellow travelers in media over all the hyperventilating they've been doing in the course of the last couple of weeks about Donald Trump actually doing what he said he was going to do. I did mention in the previous hour, I believe, that we now have two polls. I mentioned Rasmussen yesterday. Ipsos is out now, and both of these back up the president in his effort to pause the immigration and refugee resettlement programs from 7 countries that are considered potential terrorist hotbeds. We've been hearing, of course, that the American people are enraged by this action and we're better than that. And oh, this isn't in any way American. No, the president is just a mean, mean man and he's a Nazi and he's going to take over the country and he's going to put Muslims in gas chambers. We know it's coming. Well, it turns out that, of course, the American people in both those polls overwhelmingly support President Trump. And one writer even said that if this had been described, instead of being called a Muslim ban by your fellow travelers in media and liberals, that if it was clear to people that it was just a pause in the program, that it's been done before, that the government of Jordan, the Jordanian king was visiting with Mike Pence just in the last couple of days, that the government of Jordan says we can't properly vet these people. They tell us you can't do it either, as long as we can, and we're right here. So these issues have all come up, but if the public had been told simply by the media that it was a pause, then those numbers of support would be even higher. They might be 100%. Well, they wouldn't be for the professional agitators out there, the renamobs that have been out working hard in all of this. The thing is that the egg on the faces of some of these liberal leaders. Did you see the video that was aired last night? Fox picked this up, and it was aired by Brett Baer on his program. Special Report, the show is called. Chuck Schumer a few years ago giving an interview where he says, well, we need to better vet these people. We need extreme vetting because we don't know who's dangerous and we can't allow terrorists into this country. So we need a better vetting process and perhaps a pause in refugee resettlement. Really? This was the same guy that had the crocodile tears the other day because Donald Trump actually did it? And then they had video of Sally Yates. She was the acting attorney general who got fired by the president the other day for defying him. Well, she was sitting at a congressional hearing a couple of years ago, and she was asked by some of the members of the congressional hearing what she thought about being insubordinate when it came to dealing with orders you might not like from the boss. And Sally Yates said, oh, you can't do that. You got to follow the orders the boss gives you. Oh, really? Then, so where is this outrage coming from? The fellow travelers in media and the liberals over her firing. In other words, she basically backed up what the president did this week. So, Lefty, it seems that you're disingenuous. You can't hide in the internet age, and if there's videotape still out there floating around, makes it very difficult for you to come out and preen. And this is from the Daily Caller. The year was 2010. The president was Mr. Obama. John Ward, writing at the Daily Caller on June 23rd of that year, President Obama relieved General Stanley McChrystal of his command of the war in Afghanistan Wednesday because of insubordinate remarks by him and his aides in a Rolling Stone article published earlier. The people who did like it, the people who were aghast that McChrystal disrespected the then current administration. Those people are easy to spot because they're the ones who are now kicking up a fuss about President Trump firing an insubordinate underling. Gosh, gee willikers. Well, yeah, but see, he's Mr. Trump and President Obama was God King. Yeah, that's the difference. How about this? Daily Signal, acting Attorney General's defiance of Trump shows politicized nature of DOJ. Furthermore, she claimed that in addition to her legal responsibilities, she has an obligation to, quote, stand for what is right, unquote, and she obviously does not believe the executive order is right. But Yates is wrong, according to this writer. As the Deputy Attorney General and Acting Attorney General, her obligation is to defend federal law and actions taken by the President pursuant to the law when there is a valid basis for doing so, regardless of whether or not she agrees with the President from a public policy standpoint or thinks his action is the right thing to do. There you have it. She And yet liberals are stamping their feet, and the late night comedians are amplifying it, and the major newspapers are amplifying it, and they're all a bunch of hypocrites. This morning, speaking of hypocrisy, well, a couple of things. I got to share with you this segment. Some comments. Nancy Pelosi, formerly Speaker of the House of Representatives, she was appearing on CNN. CNN was doing a town hall on illegal immigration when a woman got up whose son had been killed and tortured, we should point out, by an illegal immigrant, and said to Pelosi, well, which one of your children and grandchildren are you willing to sacrifice in a situation like this? I want you to listen to Ms. Pelosi's remarks in reply. It reminds me of Michael Dukakis when he was asked if his wife was raped and killed, if he would support the death penalty, and he went into some sort of, bookish answer instead of... George H.W. Bush looked at Bernard Shaw from CNN at the time and said, Bernie, what kind of a question is that about my wife? But this is Pelosi's response. The woman, by the way, at the forum actually is a little hoarse from a cold, but take a listen to this, about 90 seconds long, and listen to Pelosi's ridiculous response.
He tortured him, he beat him, he tied him up like an animal, and he set him on fire. And I am not a one-story mother. This happens every day because there are no laws enforced at the border. We have to start giving American families first. This is not bad to not put Americans first. We have family that fought and died for this country. How do you reconcile in your head about allowing people to disavow the law? And the second part of my question is this. If you need to go home tonight and line up your babies, as you say, and your grandbabies, which one of them could you look in their eyes today and tell them that they're expendable for another foreign person to have a nicer life? Which one would you like to say, you, my child, are expendable for someone else to come over here and not follow the law and have a nicer life?
Well, I commend you for sharing your story. I can't even imagine the pain. No, I can't even imagine. There's nothing, I'm sure, that can compare to the grief that you have. And so I pray for you. I pray for you. And again, we all pray that none of us has to experience what you've experienced. So thank you for channeling your energy to help prevent something like that from happening. But I do want to say to you that in our sanctuary cities, our people are not disobeying the law.
Excuse me, then why do you call it a sanctuary city? Did they not cross the border illegally? Is that why the government currently would like to send them back? Because they broke the law? She says they are not here illegally. Well, what is it? Come on. What kind of an answer is that? She just put her foot in her mouth, and she's so cold. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your loss, and I'll pray for you. But these illegals are going to vote for me. So your son getting burned to death while he was still alive, that's an acceptable loss. We can handle that. And my children and grandchildren, don't worry about them. They live behind a gated community. So I'm not worried at all. And, if it's your kid, he was probably a Republican anyway, coming from Texas. 9:15, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Pelosi's probably looking over at the host on CNN saying, how did you allow this to happen? Remember, you work for me. 23 right now. And then I have this from the Associated Press. You want to talk about a writer at Associated Press, this paragraph story on the updated News Minute just before 8 o'clock this morning. The Boise City Council has voted unanimously to adopt a resolution affirming the city's role as a welcoming community and a community of refuge. The Idaho Statesman reports the resolution passed Tuesday declares, quote, the city of Boise is committed to being a welcoming city and creating a community where all of our residents feel welcomed, safe, and able to fully participate in and contribute to our city's economic and social life, unquote. Well, wait a minute. This isn't a paragraph long. It's a long paragraph, though, from the Associated Press. Did the Statesman leave it out, or did AP purposefully leave it out? That they didn't use the word sanctuary city, but it's a community of refuge. Do you see the efforts now? Because sanctuary city, libs have given it a bad name. Now their fellow travelers, their minions, their associates in mainstream media are deciding, well, we can't use sanctuary city any longer because that implies criminality. So It is now a welcoming community, and that's actually capitalized, welcoming city. W and C are both capitalized on welcoming city in the resolution. Welcoming city and a community of refuge. Because, other words, there's a bill going around right now in the state legislature which would essentially order the cities and towns and villages, counties in this state. I don't know if there's any villages, hamlets. Order them. It would tell them you can't do this. And when I first saw it, I thought, well, that won't happen here in Idaho. It's happened. We talked about this with Steve Millington yesterday morning, and lo and behold, in Boise, the council goes and does this. And now, what do they call a mayor in Germany? A Meister? Now Meister Beater up there, appropriately named, he's going to go ahead and probably put his stamp of approval on it, and we'll have our own sanctuary city, the biggest city in Idaho. I guess they'll have to be worried about losing. Steve said yesterday that we don't have that much federal money going in there. But if the state legislature can step in and turn this around, but that's the point I'm making about media, is the perfidiousness, the outright evil in changing the language, and not even in this story calling it a sanctuary city, but calling it a welcoming city and a community of refuge. So I guess people there can get burned alive, and, as long as the guy doing the burning is going to vote for Democrats, it's okay. 9:18, you're up next. You're on Top Story with Bill Colley on KLIX.
Bill, where was the sobbing Schumer's tears when Obama had a drone that wiped out a wedding party in the Mideast, and when Obama had a drone that killed a grandmother in front of her grandchildren?
Well, Chuck Schumer is, again, the old line from Bob Dole about Schumer, the most dangerous place in Washington is between a camera and Chuck Schumer. I would say nothing has changed there. He'll mow you down to get his face on there, and, the tears the other day. And, of course, all of the fellow travelers, oh, it was real. He really cried. Right. Your nose is growing too, just like his. And you don't think that people notice it. You're like sociopaths. You think you're telling somebody something, and you think that they don't notice that you're full of baloney. We're coming up on a short break. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 23. Just a quick note. I've been telling you about the Total Body Transformation System. I have been involved with this since late September, and I've dropped 60 pounds, and this is not a fad diet. The diet was developed by a company that's been in business for 21 years. They have an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau. The diet is supported by academic researchers at prestigious universities such as Columbia, Cornell, and Tufts. I wanted to point out as well, you'll burn 6 times more fat with the Total Body Transformation System and lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. And to answer the question about cost, people have been asking me about that. Just to remind you, about the same as your groceries. That's for the meal replacement plan, which is often healthier than your current meals, and you still get a good dose of calories every day and food you like to eat. The average participant will drop 22 pounds in 60 days and lose 4 inches off the waist, and it comes with a full money-back guarantee. You need more information or more details, or you'd like to sign up, call Don Chandler at 208-731-3560. Don Chandler at 731-3560. We have a lot of territory to still cover, and we never seem to have quite enough time. I'm going to try to get there today with a few last remaining topics I have in front of me. I got to share a quick note with you that came from USA Today about Steve Bannon. Now, if you don't know who he is, I'll give you a quick tutorial here. Bannon was a naval officer. He was in the Navy for 7 years, and the people who actually served with him, that is, aside him, or for him, or people who were actually his superiors, all say that he was a tremendous officer, which, so he gets rave reviews from the people that he served with. Afterward, he ended up getting a couple of degrees, different master's degrees from large universities, and worked on Wall Street for a while, made a lot of money, ended up then working at Breitbart after the passing of Andrew Breitbart, and he hosted Breitbart's radio show, which, if you have satellite radio, you can hear. Not that I'm recommending that you dump me for that, but I've actually been looking into satellite radio just because if I was to do a lot of driving, maybe I'll do it in the summer. You can hear some rather interesting shows while you're driving. And I've heard Breitbart Radio. They have a new host doing most of these programs now. But Bannon was an advisor to President Donald Trump during the campaign, and now is sitting on that National Security Council, which has the liberals wetting themselves. They're dropping stinky piles everywhere they go. They're just completely enraged that this guy, who is not a flaming liberal himself, would be allowed to have any input into national defense, notwithstanding 7 years as a naval officer. I want to get to a little bit more on that in just a moment, but I want to point out, if you're listening to the program today, as I like to say, thank you. But if you're having difficulty listening, you may need to be giving a telephone call, or you should give a telephone call to Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. She's offering a new hearing device available which works with the brain to help those with hearing loss hear more naturally than any other previous aid on the market. She's offering a 2-week free trial to those if you have an interest in it. And you can call today to schedule your personal fitting appointment. Open your world to better hearing. Call Mount Harrison Audiology and Dr. Pickup at 312-0957. That's 312-0957. So USA Today, it's not a conservative publication by any means, of course. And they're very worried about Steve Bannon. They decided to do a long piece on Bannon yesterday. I saw it last night, trying to discredit him. So they sat down and they listened to the archives of his old radio shows for Breitbart. Far more significant may be the views, the writer says, he brings to that table, which represent a sharp break from how previous administrations approached security issues, especially around Islamic terrorism. In other words, unlike President Obama, his staff doesn't go around and bow or drag James Taylor over to France so he can sing, "You've Got a Friend." Some of the great diplomatic efforts by the Obama White House, we'll never forget them. In dozens of hours of audio recordings reviewed by USA Today of his Breitbart News daily radio show in 2015 and 2016, Bannon told his listeners that the United States and the Western world are engaged in a, quote, global existential war, unquote. And he entertained claims that a fifth column of Islamic sympathizers had infiltrated the U.S. government and news media. Well, they certainly did in the Obama White House. Media, there's no doubt there, is there? Bannon repeatedly made sarcastic references to Islam as a religion of peace. Probably every time somebody got blown up in an Islamic attack, which happens somewhere around the world every day. While hosting his radio program, Bannon made statements that diverged from decades of U.S. foreign policy. In other words, we're not going to have foreign policy any longer conducted by Curly Joe Besser. We're going to war in the South China Sea in 5 to 10 years, aren't we? He said in March 2016. There is no doubt about that, he said. They're taking their sandbars and making basically stationary aircraft carriers and putting missiles on those. They come here to the U.S. in front of our face, and you understand how important face is, and say it's an ancient territorial sea. So he's warning that we could be at war with China. Warning, we could be at war with China. And how is that in any way offensive? You remember a name, those of you who are students of history, Billy Mitchell. Billy Mitchell was a general, and he was a big proponent of air power. And Billy Mitchell believed that, and he actually did a demonstration where he showed how you could destroy ships at sea. He said navies were no longer going to rule the seas with these big old dreadnoughts and firing shells back and forth at each other. That the real power during the upcoming war, and this was in the late 1920s, he said the real threat will be people who have these aircraft carriers, and they're going to use a lot of aircraft to destroy ships at sea. And he got drummed out of the military because of it. And people said, well, you keep saying Japan would be the big threat from Asia. The Japanese are wonderful people. The women wear those nice dresses and have the pins in their hair, and the men like sake. And, what are you talking about? And they like baseball, too. And sure enough, he died before the advent of World War II, but he was spot on. Do you remember the name? And warning about Islam and the threat that is posed by Islam. Well, that threat has been posed it's been posed for 1,300 years, but it got revived about 1970 when they started hijacking airplanes and then killing Israeli athletes and then killing Americans, throwing Americans off the Achille Lauro, Americans who were in wheelchairs and drowning them in the Mediterranean Sea. And blowing up nightclubs and you name it, flying planes into large buildings in the Pentagon and all of that. Well, back in the 1930s, there was this little mustachioed, kooky-looking fellow named Adolf Hitler who was in politics in Germany, and everybody said, oh, look at the funny guy over there. He looks like Charlie Chaplin. Except there was a fellow in England named Winston Churchill who kept saying, You better watch out. This guy's dangerous. If we stop him now, we don't have to worry about him later. And everybody said, Churchill, go back and sit in the corner over there and shut up. Except Billy Mitchell and Winston Churchill were right. Just like Steve Bannon, they were laughed off the stage by the left and by the elites. Perhaps it might be time to start listening to this guy, and the left is angry that he's got Donald Trump's ear. What a shame. 928, you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on KLIX.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Ever since Muhammad's first prophecy, the modus operandi of Mohammedans is to fight without mercy, which means to slaughter men, women, and children, take over every country you can until you become weak, in which case you sue for peace until you become strong again, so that you can fight without mercy and slaughter men, women, and children and take over one nation after another.
And again, and I thank you for the call, you've got politicians out there who keep mouthing those words, religion of peace. I read the Quran, 1985. A friend gave me a copy of it, and I read it. And after I was finished, I thought, holy moly. But we had so little impact or influence by these people at that point that you didn't see it as a big threat domestically. You did know that was the same year, by the way, that Leon Klinghoffer was in his wheelchair, thrown off that cruise ship, the Achille Lauro, by these people, which showed us just how gutless, godless, and just devious they happen to be. I mean, they are just plain evil. And yet we keep hearing, but they bring such a diversity to our communities. Well, they're looking to stamp out diversity. And if you got 100 of them, probably no trouble. You got 1,000 of them, you get 100,000 of them, you're going to be fighting a war. That's all. That's all we've been warning about. But you just keep, burying your heads in the sand. It's 25 right now. It's 9:30. We've got more coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story.